Hey guys, welcome to JoCoYo. I want to start today with a question, and I want you to sit with it for a minute before I explain it. The official Johnston County history says the first African American to hold elected office in the county was a man named Smith Brooks, the Smithfield Town Commissioner during Reconstruction. And then it says the next African American to hold elected office in the 20th century was a 25-year-old teacher named Max Sowell, who was elected to the Selmatown Council in 1969. Reconstruction ended around 1877. Max Sowell was elected in 1969. That's 92 years. Now, I want you to think about what was happening here in North Carolina during those 92 years. Were there no black men in Johnston County who ran for anything, who served anywhere, who held any office at all? Of course there were. And today we're going to talk about what happened to them. Even though, and this is the thing, I can't really tell you their names. Not because I haven't looked, but because that erasure is sort of the story. I'm Joey, this is JoCoYo, and this is the story of what happened to black political power in Johnston County between 1877 and 1969, and why the official history has almost nothing to say about it. Now, to understand what happened, you have to understand what was possible before it got taken away. After the Civil War, black men in North Carolina had the vote. They used it. Across the state, there were approximately 1,000 elected or appointed black officials during what became known as the Fusion era of the 1890s. These were magistrates, county commissioners, school board members, justices of the peace, registers of deeds, ordinary local offices, that kind of, those kind of offices matter day to day, county to county, township to township. Johnston County was part of this. Smith Brooks wasn't the only one. He was just the one who made it into the official timeline because he predated this period that got deliberately erased. Here's how North Carolina worked in the 1890s. After decades of Democratic control, a strange thing happened. Farmers were going broke. Cotton prices were collapsing. The railroads were gouging everybody, and out of that economic misery grew a new political party, the Populists, who were mostly white farmers who'd had enough of the Democratic establishment. And in North Carolina, those white populists did something remarkable. They made a deal with black Republican voters who were still casting ballots in the eastern part of the state. Between 1894 and 1900, Republican populist cooperation resulted in newly configured delegations from North Carolina to the U.S. Congress. Populist Republican control of the General Assembly, Republicans and populists in state executive offices, and a non-democratic state Supreme Court. A significant number of cooperationist office holders were black. This coalition, called Fusion, it won. For 6 years, from 1894 to 1900, the Fusionists ran North Carolina. Black men held office. Local elections were actually contested. And Johnston County, sitting in the eastern part of the state with its substantial black population, was all part of this. Your congressman during those years was George Henry White. White was nominated by the Republicans in 1896, and in an election held under a liberalized election law enacted by the Fusion legislature, he beat the incumbent Democratic Representative Frederick Woolard 19,332 to 15,378. He represented North Carolina's 2nd congressional districts, known across the state as the Black Second, and Johnston County was in his territory. He was the only black congressman in America during his 2 terms. That's crazy. And he used that platform relentlessly. On January 20th, 1900, White introduced an unprecedented bill to make lynching a federal crime, subjecting those who participated in mob violence to potential capital punishment. It died in committee. But before everything died, there was a brief window, 6 years, when the political map of Johnston County looked different from what came before and what came after, when black men held local offices that we no longer have records of in the standard histories, when the Smithfield Herald was covering elections that included black candidates, when the county's black citizens were not just voting, but they were actually governing, and the Democrats decided that they were done with it. The Democrats repeatedly stated that only white men were fit to hold political office. They often accused the Fusionists, especially the Republicans, of supporting, quote, Negro domination in the state. The Democrats referred to themselves as the white man's party and appealed to white North Carolinians to restore them to power. The 1898 campaign was not subtle. It was not dog whistle politics. On election eve, at a meeting in Wilmington, Alfred Waddell, a former congressman and Confederate general, provided marching orders for the more than 1,000 men gathered. He said, quote, "You are the sons of noble ancestry. You are Anglo-Saxons. You are armed and prepared, and you will do your duty. Go to the polls tomorrow, and if you find the Negro out voting, tell him to leave the polls. If he refuses, kill him, shoot him down in his tracks." End quote. No, that's not dog whistle. That's straight out. 2 days after the election, on November 10th, 1898, an armed mob in Wilmington destroyed a black-owned newspaper and burned the building. They searched the city for black residents and Fusionists. Between 14 and 300 black people were killed. The Fusionist government was overthrown. It was the only successful coup d'etat in American history. An actual sitting, democratically elected government was overthrown by white supremacists. That was Wilmington, but the 1898 election happened everywhere in North Carolina, including Johnston County. The red shirts, armed white men on horseback, rode through black neighborhoods across eastern North Carolina. At several rallies in southeastern North Carolina, large groups of men dressed in red shirts and openly brandishing weapons rode through predominantly African-American neighborhoods in an effort to scare potential Republican voters away from the polls. Now, we don't have the specific Johnston County accounts of what happened that November. The Smithfield Herald would have covered it, and that newspaper's headlines are searchable at the Heritage Center in Smithfield back to 1885. If you want to know what was printed in Smithfield in October and November of 1898, that database is waiting for you. What I can tell you is what happened to the political landscape of the entire state, which Johnston County was part of. The Democrats won overwhelmingly. And then they set about making sure they'd never have to fight that hard again. In 1899, the new Democratic-controlled legislature passed a constitutional amendment. It went to voters in August of 1900. It passed. This disenfranchisement amendment to the North Carolina Constitution required prospective voters to pay a poll tax and to pass a literacy test. Now, it all sounds like it's not harmful, everyone does it. Well, no, because the poll tax was costly to the poor and applied only to those intending to vote. In addition, in 1900, almost 30% of all voting-age males were illiterate, a disproportionate percentage of whom were poor African Americans. And then there was your grandfather clause. You could skip the literacy test if you could prove that you, or a direct ancestor, had been eligible to vote before January 1st, 1867, which meant before black men got to vote, which meant, in practice, the grandfather clause was available to white men and almost no black men at all. There's a document in the North Carolina Digital Collections. It's called the Johnston County Permanent Registration of Voters, 1902 to 1908. It is the registry of men in this county who registered to vote under the grandfather clause. It is, in its very structure, a receipt for what was done, the names of the men who kept their vote, the mechanism that made them legible to the state, the paperwork of exclusion. Between 1900 and 1902, white turnout plummeted and black turnout was almost non-existent. Not until the 1960s, when the passage of strong federal voting rights legislation did its continuing impact began to dissipate. It should be noted that as of today, the Supreme Court has changed what the Voting Rights Act means, but that's another story. On January 29th, 1901, George Henry White stood on the floor of the United States House of Representatives and gave his farewell address. He was the last black congressman from the South for 72 years. He knew that when he stood up. He said, quote, "This, Mr. Chairman, is perhaps the Negro's temporary farewell to the American Congress. But let me say, Phoenix-like, he will rise up again someday. These parting words are in behalf of an outraged, heartbroken, bruised, and bleeding but God-fearing people. Faithful, industrious, loyal people, rising people, full of potential force. He said, I cannot live in North Carolina and be a man and be treated as a man. White lamented afterwards. Then he left the state. So here's what I want you to understand about that 92-year gap in the Johnston County record. It's not a gap, it's a deletion. Between 1894 and 1900, there were black office holders in Johnston County, not famous ones, not congressmen, township justices, school board members, local magistrates, men whose names appear in the minutes of county commissioner meetings from 1895 and 1897, men whose names appear in the 1868 to 1898 voter registration records that are available at the Heritage Center through Family Search. Men who held power for a real window of time in their real community. And then the red shirts rode through, and the literacy test passed, and the grandfather clause registered white men, and the Smithfield Herald of November 1898 presumably printed the Democratic victory as a triumph of civilization. And those names, those local office holders, got quietly removed from the story that the county told about itself. The official history skips from Smith Brooks in Reconstruction to Max Sowell in 1969 as if nothing happened in between. But something happened. A specific, organized, violent legal campaign happened that erased black political participation from Johnston County for nearly a century. And the evidence that it happened and who it happened to is sitting in the records in Smithfield, in the voter registration records, in the county commissioner minutes, in the Smithfield Herald headlines database that runs from 1885 to 2007. The names are in there somewhere. The episode that tells you those names requires a visit to Smithfield. But this episode, the one that you're listening to right now, is about why those names are so hard to find and who made them that way. George Henry White, after leaving North Carolina, went to Philadelphia and eventually helped found a planned community in New Jersey, Whitesboro, designed to give black Americans from the South a place to rebuild, a phoenix, just as he had promised. In Johnston County, the rebuilding took longer. Max Sowell was elected in Selma in 1969. He was 25 years old. He was described in the county's own official history as the first African American elected to public office in the 20th century, as if the 20th century had simply never included the people who came before, as if the gap were natural, as if nothing had been done to create it, as if no one tried to stop it. Something had been done. People tried to stop it. We know what it was. We know roughly when it happened. We know what tools were used and the people it was done to. The local black office holders of Johnston County's fusion years, they deserve to be named. That's someone's research project. Hopefully, maybe it's yours. I'm Joey. This is JoCoYo. The Heritage Center holds the Smithfield Herald Headlines database, searchable back to 1885. The Johnston County Permanent Registration of Voters, 1902 to 1908, is available free through the North Carolina Digital Collections at digital.ncdcr.gov. Voter registration records from 1868 to 1898 are indexed at Family Search. The county commissioner minutes from the Fusion era are in the state archives. George Henry White's farewell address is at Documenting the American South, University of North Carolina, and is worth reading in full. The names are in there. Somebody go find them.